everybody, welcome back to my channel Learn with Virali. I'm Virali, your guide on this PMP adventure. If you are new to my channel, I'm Virali, a certified PMP professional helping people to pass their PMP exams on the very first try. So if you are not subscribed to my channel yet, make sure to subscribe as it helps me to create more such kind of videos and offer help to the community. In our ongoing series of mini mock exam practice, I'm back with another set of 15 challenging situational questions, making sure that we are taking the actual exam pressure and turning it into a productive practice. So make sure you download the set of 15 questions as a PDF from the description below and set a timer aside for another 30 minutes, making sure that you solve each of the questions in the single sitting and then come back to this video to check if you have done all those questions correct or not. So I'll be giving you all the explanations along with the correct answers, and also will give you a set of cheat sheet that is going to be helpful for you to get ready for your actual exam. So please make sure you comment down your email addresses below to directly receive it in your DM. So let's get started. Question number 1. A project manager is leading a complex software implementation. During the project planning phase, the team identifies a requirement that conflicts with the organization's security policies. The project sponsor wants to proceed with the requirement as defined by the client. What should the project manager do first? Please note the usage of keyword first. Options are: request a formal exception to the security policy. Option B, document the conflict in the risk register and develop a response plan. Option C, analyze the impact of the requirement and security policy conflict. Option D, escalate the issue to the organization's security team. Please understand that as a project manager, you are not supposed to take any action directly given any situation that you encounter as per the PMBOK terms. So given the situation over here, we are now supposed to identify the first action that we'll take since this particular situation has occurred. So now my first step as a project manager according to PMBOK is going to be to go ahead and analyze the impact of this particular requirement and how it is going to be conflicting with the organization's security policy, so that I can understand what are the implications about this particular requirement and how it is going to affect the organization given different policies that the organization already has. So once I understand the impact after analysis, I can then make sure that whatever I need to do next, let's say that can be anything wherein you can just document it as a risk and then develop a response plan, which is option B, which comes after analyzing. Again, if it is gonna be a requesting a formal exception, which will be after analyzing the impact again, which is option number A. So again, option A, B and D are incorrect. Even if you need to escalate, you first need to know what are the impacts that this particular requirement is going to create. So the correct answer over here is going to be analysis. Option number C is the right answer, option choice over here. Question number 2. A project team is using an agile approach for software development. Several new user stories have been identified during a sprint review. So what should happen with these new user stories? Options are: they should be added to the current sprint backlog. Option B, they should be added to the product backlog for prioritization. Option C, they should be implemented immediately to avoid scope creep. Option D, they should be presented to the change control board for approval. Alright, so as soon as you encounter any new user stories based on the agile software development approach, you have to keep few things in mind. That it is the responsibility of a product owner to decide which are the user stories that are more important given the minimal viable product implementation or an MVP to be presented to the client, making sure that the most important features are incorporated into a particular sprint. So given the current scenario, the items or the new user stories should be added to the actual product backlog, and wait for the product owner to prioritize those so that we are going to be able to build an MVP that is gonna hold much of a priority or much of importance given the product that we are working on. So if it is added to the current backlog, it is that particular sprint is always going to be expanded and expanded. So it's not the right option choice over here. Option B says they should be added to the product backlog for prioritization. That is the correct option choice for this question. Option C says they should be implemented immediately to avoid scope creep. Never ever. No immediate actions are supposed to be taken at any point in time. So option C is incorrect, definitely. And option D is they should be presented to the change control board for approval. Now, change control board is more or less used in the traditional or predictive approaches instead of the agile projects that we are discussing over here. So option D is not relevant to the agile methodologies. So option number D is not in the competition. So correct answer over here is going to be option B. 3. A project manager notices that a critical activity is at risk of delay due to the resource constraints. The project is already running on a tight schedule with a minimum float. Using the EVM analysis or earned value analysis, the SPI is 0.85 and the project is 60% complete. So which of the following is the best course of action? Please note the usage of keyword best over here. Options are fast track the remaining activities to make up for the lost time. Option B, crash the critical activity by adding resources. Option C, perform resource leveling to optimize resource allocation. And option D is to submit a change request to extend the project deadline. Now, given the EVM values over here with an SPI, which is Schedule Performance Index, which should typically be greater than 1, making sure that the project is ahead of the given or the planned schedule. So here the value is 0.85. That means the project is significantly behind the schedule. Typically, we can say that it's 85% of the planned rate that we can discuss over here. So basically, here the given activity that the project manager is identifying is on the critical path, and now there are issues like the resources being a biggest constraint all about. So if that is the case, the best course of action is something that we are supposed to identify given this situation over here. So now let us talk option by option to see if whichever option is making more sense. Option A is to fast track the remaining activities to make up for the lost time. So basically, if you go ahead and start like running the activities in parallel, it is going to add or introduce additional risks because you will be overlapping certain activities that are normally not going to be performed in parallel. So that means you are introducing more risk by fast tracking or by taking the fast track approach. So option option A is not going to be the correct option choice over here. Going on to option C, which is to perform resource leveling to optimize resource allocation. Now, resource leveling typically is going to extend the schedule, which is definitely not going to be helpful as we are already behind the planned schedule. So resource leveling is not a right option choice or the best option choice given the current question. Option D is submit a change request to extend the project deadline. Now, extending the deadline should only be considered after attempting to recover the schedule by different means. So if you have attempted to recover the schedule, only then you can consider whether you want to submit a change request for setting a new deadline for the project. So the correct answer over here is going to be crash the critical activity by adding resources, which is option B in this question. Question number 4. A project manager is working in a highly regulated industry. During project execution, an external audit reveals that the required compliance documentation process has not been followed for several deliverables. The project is 75% complete, so what should the project manager do first? Please note the usage of keyword first. Options are update the quality management plan to include the compliance process, identify the specific deliverables that are non-compliant. Option C, notify the project sponsor about the compliance issue. Option D, request additional resources to correct the documentation. Now, since this is a compliance kind of a project having issues which are reported by the external audit or the external auditors, the first and the very foremost action that is supposed to be taken by the project manager should be to go ahead and identify like which of these deliverables are related to the compliance issue. Because out of the 75% of the project which is completed, there are certain or several deliverables which are identified with an issue of compliance. So now we have to identify the very first action that the project manager should take. So let us go through each options to understand which one is correct. Option A says update the quality management plan to include the compliance process. So if you even update the quality management or QA plan, it is not going to solve the given question. Though it is going to be important for you to update it for future sprints, but it's not going to be helping us to solve the problem over here as the very first action. Option B, identify the specific deliverables that are non-compliant. Yes, that could be a situation wherein the project manager analyzes that given 75% of the project, which are the deliverables which are non-compliant. So that option might be the correct answer. So let's now look at option C. Notify the project sponsor about the compliance issue. Notifying the issue to the project sponsor is not going to give us or take any corrective action because the project manager is supposed to report it with a certain set of metrics, and here the project manager is not aware before he goes ahead and analyzes like which of these are non-compliant. So option C is not the right choice, and option D is to request additional resources to correct the documentation. It is going to come in the later stages wherein the project manager first needs to identify which are the places that needs to be corrected. Before that, even requesting additional resources is not the first step that the project manager takes. So ideally, the task of a project manager is to first identify which of them are non-compliant so that option A, C, and D can be taken as the next option choice. That is, even to update the QA plan or notify the project sponsor or even add additional resources to take those corrective actions once those deliverables have been identified. So correct answer over here is option B. Question number 5. A project manager is leading a global team distributed across multiple time zones. Team members report difficulties in coordination and knowledge sharing. Which of the following would be the most effective approach to improve team collaboration? Please note the usage of keyword most. Options are implement mandatory daily status updates via email. Option B, establish a centralized knowledge repository with version control. Option C, schedule rotating meeting times to accommodate different time zones. Option D, create sub-regional teams with dedicated team leads. Now, whenever we are handling the global team or whenever the team is distributed globally with multiple time zones in place, we have to understand that the most effective approach in order to keep everybody in the team updated and able to share their knowledges, what is the most efficient solution that the project manager should be using over here is something that we are supposed to identify. So let's go by each option to kind of get started. Option A says implement mandatory daily status updates via email. Now, email threads can be cluttered and sometimes it's pretty hard to find a certain thing that was discussed via email. So not the most effective approach, definitely over here. So first option A is wrong. Option B, establish a centralized knowledge repository with a version control. That sounds like a good option. That means in whatever time zone you are, you see everything that is updated with the latest date and the time with the latest version typically, so that it is being accessible to everybody who are residing in different time zones. So there is no dependency on status updates or daily meetings. Option C says schedule rotating meeting times to accommodate different time zones. Now, if you are even doing the rotation, there are still certain team members who have to take those meetings during inappropriate times, wherein they should be actually going to bed before attending those meetings. So not the most effective solution approach over here. And option D is to create regional sub-teams with dedicated team leads. Again, that is going to be harder for managing a global team given this particular scenario. So the correct option choice over here is going to be option B, so that it reduces the dependency of those daily check-ins which are mandatory given the entire team is distributed in different time zones. Question number 6. A project manager is using critical chain method for scheduling. After completing the schedule, what is the next step the project manager should take? Please understand or note the usage of keyword next. Options are add feeding buffers where non-critical chains merge with a critical chain. Option B, reduce task durations by eliminating multitasking. Option C, level resources across all project activities. Option D, optimize the critical path by compressing the schedule. So here we are supposed to understand how the critical chain method works, and then given the critical chain method, like once you are deciding the schedule of that particular project which needs to be completed, you as a project manager always should keep in mind to add certain buffers to the project so that even if certain activities which are non-critical gets delayed, you still can deliver the project on the finalized or decided deadline. So option number A is making more sense, saying add feeding buffers where non-critical chains merge with a critical chain. So I'll keep that aside and come to option B, which is to eliminate multitasking. So elimination of multitasking would already have been done earlier when you are estimating project durations, because you are taking into consideration the worst case scenario so that you add buffers so that you can anticipate any variability in between and can still deliver the project on the same decided deadline. So option B would have already been done first. Going to option number C, which is to level resources across all the projects. Leveling resources would also have been done earlier prior to the schedule creation and not after. Coming to option D, which is to optimize the critical path by compressing the schedule. Now here there is a confusion that is being created. We are discussing about a chain, critical chain, not the critical path. So option D is not relevant to the given question. So the correct answer over here is going to be option A, which is to have buffers in place and make sure that we still deliver the project on the decided deadline. Question number 7. A project manager is reviewing the risk register during a monthly status meeting. Several risks identified during planning have not occurred and their probability seems lower than initially assessed. So what should the project manager do with the risk response plan for these risks? Options are remove the risk from the risk register to simplify tracking. Option B, maintain the original response plan but reduce monitoring frequency. Option C, reassess the risk and update the probability and impact. Option D, reallocate risk response resources to more probable risks. Now you have to understand over here that because you have now passed the planning stage, you did anticipate certain risks that may occur. But since they have not occurred and you have now moved on to the next phase, so the very first thing that needs to be done is to again repeat the process of assessment, or we can say we have to again go reassess the risk and its impact to decide the further course of response plans or further course of action given if those risks may occur. So in that case, we cannot simply remove those risks, or we cannot reduce monitoring because risk can occur at any point in time. So it is not a good practice to kind of reduce the monitoring frequency. So option A and B are totally not relevant given the current scenario. That means we cannot remove those risks completely, or we should not reduce the monitoring frequency. Moving on to option C seems like a good choice, which is to reassess the risk and update their probability and impact, which is going to help us to kind of come to the next option, which is to reallocate risk response resources to more probable risk, which could be a next course of action, but definitely reassessment is going to come first. So the correct option choice over here is going to be option C, which is to reassess the risk and update the probability and impact. Question number 8. During a project retrospective, a team member suggests that the project should have been more successful if the team had used a different technical approach. The documented lessons learned from similar previous projects had recommended the approach that was ultimately used. How should the project manager address this feedback? Options are: explain that the approach was selected based on the organization's process assets. Option B, document the suggestion as a lesson learned for future projects. Option C, analyze whether the alternative approach would have yielded better results. Option D, implement the suggested approach in the next phase of the project. Now, please understand that the project retrospective, the main purpose of doing these retrospectives is always to capture lessons learned and then use them in the future projects or future sprints, or maybe any kind of improvement or enhancements that are going to be conducted after completing that particular sprint or the project. So even though previous lessons learned recommended the current approach, new insights should always be documented, and it should be made sure that the organization process assets are continuously updated so that you have the newest approaches and the newest lessons learned always documented and the processes always updated, so that even if some other team encounters these kind of scenarios, they can use this kind of lessons learned and can overcome those challenges altogether. So being a project manager, if you just go ahead and simply explain the current decision, which is saying as per the option A, it is not going to improve future processes, right? So option B says document the suggestion as a lesson learned for future projects. Definitely yes. Option C says analyze whether the alternative approach would have yielded better results. Analyzing alternatives might be valuable but not feasible after the given fact given in this particular question. And talking about implementing the suggested approach in the next phase of the project as option D would require proper change control process, not just implementing based on the retrospective comment made by one of the team member over here. So the correct option choice over here is going to be document the suggestion as a lesson learned for future projects. Option number B. A project manager is using a Monte Carlo simulation to analyze schedule uncertainties. The simulation results show that there is a 70% probability of completing the project by the required deadline. The sponsor considers this probability too low. So which of the following actions would most likely increase the probability of meeting the deadline? Now we have to understand a few things over here. Since we are using Monte Carlo simulation method, it typically gives us the estimated deadline for completing the project with a certain schedule of different uncertainties being kept in mind. So if the probability of meeting the deadlines is too low, which is 70% in this case, the project manager needs to do some magic in terms of getting to the finish line pretty much faster. So that means the project manager should increase the schedule efficiency. Now, how schedule efficiency can be increased? If the project manager goes ahead and executes those activities in parallel, that means fast tracking is the best approach in order to reach the deadline or the finish line pretty much faster. So now let's look at the options. Add more resources to the critical path activities. No. If you are adding more resources, it is going to increase the schedule because the project is already late. And now if you're adding more people, there might be certain other additional risks. Let's say if the additional resources might not have certain skills or may have certain gaps, which is going to delay this project even further. So option A is not the right choice. Coming to option B is to increase the contingency reserve. Increasing the contingency reserve is going to add more buffer to the project, but it's not going to solve the current situation given over here. So that's not the right choice either. Coming to option C, which says implement a fast tracking approach for near critical activities. Yes, absolutely. That is something that we had discussed, that the project manager needs to now make sure that he or she executes those activities in parallel. That means using a fast track approach. And now option D is negotiate a 2-week extension with the stakeholders. Negotiating a 2-week extension may be something that the stakeholders might not approve, given that fast tracking is a possibility over here. So it should be used as the most likely solution given the current problem. So the correct answer over here is going to be option C in this particular question. Question number 10. A project manager discovers that the key stakeholder has been making significant changes to the requirements by directly communicating with the team members. These changes are not being documented or going through the change control process. So what should the project manager do first? Please note the importance of keyword first. Options are update the stakeholder engagement plan to include more frequent communications. Option B, meet with the stakeholder to discuss the proper change control process. Option C, direct the team members to refuse undocumented changes from the stakeholders. And option D is to document the changes and submit them to the change control board retroactively. Now here the problem given in this particular question is the behavior of the stakeholder. That means the stakeholder directly goes and communicates with the team members that these are the requirements and you are supposed to deliver it based on these requirements with whatever the stakeholder says. The formal process is something like if there is a change, apart from something that has been documented already as the project documentation tasks, if there are requirements coming from the stakeholder, it should go through a proper or a formal change control process. So if the stakeholder does not know that, it is the duty of a project manager to first go ahead and educate the stakeholder about the change control process or how it should be done officially. So given that the options that we have over here, we need to understand that the project manager should meet with the stakeholder to discuss or educate him or her with the proper change control process being identified as the correct answer. Because if the team members are going to deny or refuse the changes that the stakeholder is giving them, it is definitely going to be creating conflict in because they are not obeying what the stakeholder is saying basically. So it's not the right option choice, which is option number C. Or option D is to document the changes and submit them to the change control board, but that's not going to be effective until and unless the stakeholder is educated with this process. Talking about option A is to update the stakeholder engagement plan. Updating the plan is great, but if the stakeholder is going to continue with this bad behavior, which is not acceptable in terms of documenting things and then communicating those to the team members, which is the formal process, it is not going to resolve the problem that we are discussing in this given question. So the correct answer over here is option B, that is to meet with the stakeholders to discuss the proper change control process. Question number 11. A project team is working in a regulated industry where documentation is critical for compliance. The team has adopted an agile approach but is struggling to balance agile principles with documentation requirements. Which of the following approaches would best address this challenge? Note the usage of keyword best. Options are return to a predictive approach to ensure proper documentation. Option B, create documentation in parallel with development activities. Option C, incorporate documentation requirements into definition of done. Option D, assign a dedicated team member to handle all documentation. Now, given that this is an agile project, then we have to understand that the working software is going to be prioritized over documentation. But since this particular project is from a regulated industry where compliance is more of an impact, it needs to be understood that whatever documentation has to be developed is incorporated into definition of done, which means that whatever working software that you deliver also should include mandatorily a documentation attached to it. Only then it will be identified as done or completed successfully. So that means the team integrates the compliance needs into their agile workflow. Now here they are facing difficulty pretty much in doing this task. So let us go option by option to see which is best aligning to address this challenge. Option A says return to a predictive approach. That means we are supposed to stop this agile project and return to a traditional workflow, definitely negating this particular benefit of agile process. So not the correct option choice. Going to option number B, which says create documentation in parallel with development activities. Creating parallel stream is definitely a logical option that is given over here, but it may lag the development aspects. That means it may cause delay in the development of these particular working software. So not the best option choice to address this challenge. Going to option number D for now is like assign a dedicated team member to handle all the documentation. It is actually going to contradict the agile principle by siloing the responsibilities rather than making documentation as the team's responsibility. So option D is not the right option choice either. And now coming to option C, which is to incorporate documentation requirements into definition of done, which is typically the right option choice. So before the team says that we have developed a working software, they have to make sure that it is also documented properly to mark it as completed. Question number 12. During execution of a construction project, the project manager notices that actual costs are consistently 15% higher than the planned across multiple work packages. Upon investigation, it is discovered that material prices have increased significantly since the initial estimates were created. So what should the project manager do next? Identify the keyword next over here. Options are update the cost baseline to reflect the new material prices. Option B, perform quantitative cost risk analysis to determine the impact. Option C, submit a change request to increase the project budget. Option D, look for the opportunities to reduce cost in other areas of the project. So now, this is the task of a project manager to first analyze that what is the impact quantitatively based on the cost increase with the materials that are being used in this particular construction project. So given that, the project manager should not take any set of immediate action before identifying or analyzing the requirements properly or understanding the full impact of the material price increase by performing quantitative cost risk analysis. So this is going to help us determine how much the overall budget will be affected and what is going to be our next course of action could be decided once we come to a conclusion that this is how much the overall project price is going to increase. So based on that, the correct answer over here is supposed to perform quantitative cost risk analysis to determine the impact on the overall project. So option B is the right option choice over here. Question 13. A project manager is preparing for a key milestone review with the senior stakeholders. The earned value metrics show CPI as 0.92 SPI as 0.88, CV equals to minus $75,000, SV or schedule variance, which is equal to minus $120,000. The project is 40% complete. Which of the following should the project manager's primary concern when reporting the status? Options are: the project is over budget by $75,000. Option B: the project is behind schedule by $120,000. Option C: the project will continue to lose efficiency at the current rate. Option D: the remaining work will require more resources than planned. So let us dissect the information given in this question. CPI's value is 0.92, which ideally means that we are more onto the cost side, or higher costs are incurred than they are actually planned, because the value of CPI and SPI should always be greater than or equal to 1, but both the values are less over here. SPI is 0.88, which means the project is running behind the schedule as per the planning. Value of cost variance, which is negative $75,000, which is also not acceptable. CV and SV should always be positive. So in that case, the schedule variance also is minus $120,000, which is typically again making us understand that it is behind the schedule. And given the other information which says the project is 40% complete, these are the inefficiencies which are going to continue if a proper corrective action is not going to be taken in this aspect. So the most critical concern for the project manager in this particular condition is the current trend indicates future performance risks. That means delays and cost overruns may escalate if they are not properly addressed by the project manager. So definitely we are going to go as an answer for this question with option number C. Now, why option C and not the other options? Option A and B typically say what the information is given in the question. That means the project is over budget by $75,000. Project is behind schedule by $120,000. No, we are supposed to identify the primary concern. So option D says the remaining work will require more resources than planned. Here in the question, there is no discussion about the resource shortage. The only problem that is going to happen is in regards to the budget or the schedule. So we are not going to require any more resources given the current scenario. So that's not the case at all given in the project. So the correct option or the correct answer choice over here is option C. Question number 14. A project has been using a predictive approach, but it is experiencing significant scope changes during the evolving market conditions. The project team is suggesting a shift to an adaptive approach mid-project. So what is the most important consideration for a project manager when evaluating these suggestions? Options are: whether the team has experience with adaptive methodologies. Option B: whether the organizational culture supports adaptive approaches. Option C: whether the remaining deliverables can be developed incrementally. And option D is whether the project management information system supports both the approaches. Now, the most important consideration when shifting from predictive to adaptive approach during the project execution or maybe mid-project is to understand whether the nature of the remaining work can actually be developed in an incremental or an iterative manner. So if the deliverables cannot be broken down and delivered incrementally, it is not going to be worthy. So the most important thing for a project manager to consider is something which means that you can deliver a working piece of a software in several increments. Now, given the line over here in the question which says it is experiencing significant scope changes due to evolving market conditions. So this simply means that if they are able to deliver several pieces of working software incrementally, then it is something that can be used or adapted mid-project. So the correct answer choice over here is option C. It comes after that for the project manager to understand that what is the team experience in terms of adapting to these kind of methodologies, or like using any kind of organizational culture supports for navigating through this transition. So the correct answer over here is going to be option C. Question number 15. During a project to develop a new application, the team identifies a critical technical risk with high probability of occurrence and significant impact. The risk response strategy selected is to develop a prototype to test the technical approach. This prototype development will require significant time and resources not accounted for in the original plan. So this risk response strategy is an example of which type of response? Options are avoid, mitigate, transfer, or accept. Now, please understand that you are identifying a critical risk in the project, which is simply developing that small technical approach or an MVP. Then, in that case, avoiding the risk means you are kind of avoiding that totally, just as the name says. Moving on to transference, which is simply transferring the risk to the third party or somebody else. With this particular risk, given acceptance is typically like you are accepting that the risk is going to happen, but you don't have any corrective action or any corrective measure plan in the place for like mitigating this risk. So what you are trying to do here, or the example over here that is listed in the question, is an example of mitigation, or you are trying to mitigate this risk at the very first place. So the correct answer over here is going to be mitigation. So if you found this video useful, please don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe, and make sure you write your email addresses in the comments below so that I can send you the cheat sheets that you're supposed to remember from the agile project management perspective or from the agile domain. So make sure you comment your email addresses in the comments below. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video.